Good to see you. Welcome to a hot new series featuring me and the one and only Tea-O. Those of you who follow either of us have hopefully watched the phenomenal interview that I had with Tea-O at the Myth-Slayer Cafe. The link is right above my shoulder. It was such a success and provoked such conversation that we've teamed up again for a whole series of episodes that will probably last about a year or so, that focus on a topic that is near and dear to both of us and that has more meaning and relevance now than ever. It is about exactly how you live your optimal best life. I always tell folks, I want you to live a life that's mythic. But sometimes it can be hard for people to make that into something that they concretely understand. How can I be a living myth? How can I experience the world as if I were an Olympian god? It can seem so far away, so difficult to reach. What we're trying to do together in this series is bring it down to earth, make it something that you can take into your heart, your mind, your spirit, and actually change your life, your future, with power, passion, and everything that can make life worth living. We're going to be using the allegory of things like the forest and the wild versus the zoo. I really like this idea of the zoo as an allegory for this show, because zoos actually started in ancient Greece under Alexander the Great. And at the time of myth, there was a lot of tension between emerging civilization and the jungles and the wild. So we're going to really focus on what it is to live in the zoo versus what it is to live in the jungles and the wild. But to make all of that as clear as possible, and for folks who might be watching this for the first time to really understand what's going on here, maybe we can start with our own stories a little bit. Tea-O, how did you come to live in the jungle? How did you come to live in the zoo? What has that journey meant for your life?
Yeah, thanks for that wonderful intro. My mythic journey started at the age of 24. And back then I was working as a software developer for Amazon, and I was doing pretty well. I was pretty successful. I had just started my career, but it had launched off to a pretty amazing start. And, coming from India, doing my computer engineering degree, living in a very strong culture. India is one of the oldest cultures and a very strong culture. And it's also a culture where you have not too much individuality. There's a lot more focus on family and society, and you are playing a role there. It's not as individualistic as the Western world, especially America. So coming from that, I was deeply with the mindset of this is just life. Like, I never thought what can life be. I was just given a model of life, a path that I did, choose my path to some degree. But it's like, yeah, once the path is chosen, you just go on that path for the rest of your life. My whole inspiration for computers came from my first computer when I was at the age of 6. When I entered that, I just fell in love with the virtual world, and I was just so deeply immersed in it. And then I watched The Matrix, I think at the age of 11 or 12, and that just blew me away. And then it did plant the seeds of life outside of The Matrix, but it was so conceptual at that time, especially for a 12-year-old. It's like it was a very immature idea of what is life outside of the Matrix. And so, I just got inspired that, oh yeah, of course I want to go deeper into this. Now I want to become a hacker. So I followed that path. I got my computer engineering degree, and then I got my master's in information security degree, which is as close to you can get to being a hacker, but not becoming a criminal. So I became a white hat hacker, and I joined Amazon as a software developer, but I also got a role within Amazon as a security consultant. So I was doing both of these roles, and I was doing pretty well, like I said. But then life took a completely different turn at the age of 24. So I'd been in my job for about a year and a half at that time. And through a series of life events, I ended up going to Brazil for an ayahuasca retreat. And my intention to go for that retreat was to get high. It was not for a spiritual awakening. I was not interested in mental health or becoming better. I thought I was great. Life was great. I had everything on the surface going well. I was abusing some substances, but I did not look at it as abuse or addiction. I loved what I was doing. So, I used to be smoking like approximately 30 cigarettes a day. I used to be smoking about 10 joints a day. But for me, that was living the life. That was having a great life. It was not a problem. It was the good part about life, that I get to do that. And I used to feel good about myself. So I was not looking to fix anything. I was not looking to change anything. I'd had an LSD experience before that, and that was really like the most beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. And then I heard that ayahuasca is more powerful than that. So life can only get better and more beautiful. Like I can just see life from this very beautiful lens. So that was my intention going into ayahuasca. Is like, I'm going to get high and see these beautiful visions and just have a great trip. That was my intention going into it. And well, the universe had very different plans for me. And I was a complete atheist at the time. I was very skeptical. I had no interest in spirituality, religion, personal development, mental health, psychology, psychotherapy, none of this. I was against it, in fact. It's basically the usual view that if you go for therapy, there's something wrong with you. That was my view. And if like, why do you need self-development? Life is great. My life is great. I don't need that. So when I had my awakening, I had no belief and no interest. A lot of people think that you need to believe, you need to have faith for it to work for you. And a lot of people sell it that way. A lot of the coaches and gurus and religions will tell you, you need to have faith for it to work. I did not have faith, but it worked. I did not have belief, but it worked. I had anti-belief, and it was like I was a skeptic. So I had negative belief. I was like, no, this is not real. So that was one of the big, and is one of the big foundations of my work, is that I love working with skeptics. I love working with people who are very rational, because I don't need you to believe. I know that this works, whether you believe it or not. And that's one of my favorite lines, is that thankfully, reality is not conditional upon our beliefs. If you needed to believe in it for it to be real, life would not exist. So for me, reality, there is a fundamental reality, a fundamental truth, which is beyond our beliefs, which is beyond our minds. And that is how I see the whole jungle and zoo metaphor. The zoo is where we are confined by our beliefs, where we are kept in these cages of what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, how we should live, what is the path that you should live on, and you just don't go out of these guardrails. And if you go a little bit out of the guardrails, you can extend to being a zookeeper or a trainer of the animals in the zoo. And you can have a great life and you can flourish, and you can be an entrepreneur, but you're still living within the zoo. You're still living within the confines of the known, the conditioning. So that's what is typically called the matrix. Everything is within control. That's the bounds of the zoo, is we can control everything. And for me, the jungle is what starts right beyond that. It's what I like to call the infinite, the mystical, whatever you want to call it. But anything that cannot be contained by the mind, anything that cannot be just made into a concept and locked away and boxed away and made into another part of the zoo. Like, that for me is where the jungle begins. That is the line where life becomes wild. Is when you're truly in the unknown, where it's not that you can understand everything. It's not that you have figured everything out and you have all the recipes and formulas and secrets to living the best life. It's like anything can happen in any moment. Like it's actually happened. I've been living in the jungle for the past almost 11 years now. Is that sometimes a snake can sneak into your house and be right next to your bed. It's like, and in the beginning, that was my reaction. I was completely freaking out. But now it's like, okay, that's just life. For me, that's how I see life, is that there's twists and turns at every corner. If you're truly living, right? If you're living a mythic life, especially, there's constant twists and turns, there's constant challenges and obstacles. And the real power and the real genius is, how do you navigate that? So these are my two favorite words and topics, is power and genius. And in my opinion, to live a mythic life, to live in the jungle, those are the tools that you really need, are your power and your genius. And so my work is, how do we keep increasing our power, increasing our genius without going crazy, without losing our stability, without getting corrupted and losing our integrity. But how do we actually live a beautiful life in the wild? Not in the zoo only. So we can have the comforts of the zoo. I have a lot of comforts of the zoo. I have, high-speed internet in the middle of the jungle. I have whatever I need, all the modern comforts I have. But I do not forget that life is a jungle. At least for the past 11 years, I have not fallen into the mindset that life is a zoo and everything can be controlled and everything can be made perfect. I don't want that. I actually want life to remain a jungle, for there to be constant challenges, evolution, growth, where I get to feel my strength, where I get to feel my power, where I get to exercise my genius to keep navigating life. And at the same time, I can have modern comforts. We can take everything that's great from the modern world, but not to fall into these prisons of belief, of living in this extreme suffocation. When you've been out in the wild, then the zoo feels very suffocating. But as long as you're in the zoo, the typical feeling that I come across with my clients and that I used to have in the past is that, yeah, it feels great, but there's something missing. And that missing thing is that aliveness, that spirit, that fire, and that spirit and that fire is wild. It can be tamed, it can be contained, but it's wild in its nature. It wants adventure, it wants challenge, it wants to live a mythic life. So that's been my journey. In a nutshell, that's how my journey relates to this series, is living a life that is not all about right and wrong and good and evil, and it's not about how do I be a good person and have people like me. Is how do I live fully and contribute to society and make the world a better place. But I want to feel alive. I don't want to feel like I'm doing all the right things and ticking all the boxes. I'm doing good because that's what my heart is. I'm helping people because that's what my heart is, but my heart feels alive because I'm also living this life on the wilds.
That journey has so much richness in it, and there are so many points of commonality and so many places that I have no doubt folks watching this can relate to, that is going to take us the entire series to really unpack and dive through all of those themes. And that's why it's so important that this is a full once a month lengthy series, because embedded even in that, leaving aside things that we're going to discuss later, there is an almost infinite amount of discussion. I can't help but think of the Greek myth of the creation of humanity as you were sharing that. For those who aren't familiar with it, human beings were created upon the commission of the chief god Zeus by two twin brothers, these ancient primordial deities called Prometheus and Epimetheus. Prometheus was the god of foresight. Epimetheus was aftersight. There were a certain amount of gifts that could be distributed between humans and animals. Things like feathers or fangs or super eyesight or fur or claws. And Epimetheus, who was charged specifically with designing animals, got very greedy. And because he didn't have foresight, he didn't think about anyone's or any being's interests outside of what was right on his mind in the moment. And so he gave all of the good stuff to animals. So by the time Prometheus was done designing humanity, there were no special powers or no special types of genius that could be given to humans that would enable them to compete in the wild with animals. Eventually, what Prometheus did was give humanity, depending on the version of the story, either fire or the gift of technology. And because of that gift, civilization was born, enabling humans to compete with animals in the wild. But within that story, there's a dichotomy that is created in that early segment of humans' history between humanity and the wild. Humans had been living like animals in caves, dirty, unclean, scared. The night without any fire was absolute pitch darkness. With the gift of technology and of flame, humanity was able to begin to build civilization that enabled us to have comfort. But what Alexander the Great did when he created the first zoo was symbolically attempt to bring the wild, or a sense of the wild, into a civilization that on some level or another he must have felt was inappropriately separated from it, without really thinking about the true meaning of that separation. You talk about comforts. I like life's comforts too. I spent decades practicing as an attorney, living within the caged walls of what an attorney was supposed to be and how he or she was supposed to live. This is how an attorney talks. This is how an attorney dresses. I kind of became a zookeeper in that respect. This is how an attorney even thinks. This role that you play in your life becomes an identity. And you think about it. People ask, who is Scott Mason? People would say, an attorney, right? That becomes this rigid box, the entire defining space as to what you are. You can never be mythic if your roles are bounded. And one of the things that you correctly hint at is that gods and goddesses were boundless. Their genius was beyond that of humanity, as was their power. Within the organizations that I was first an attorney and later an executive of, I felt I had power. And I felt my smarts, at least, had somewhat gotten me there. But really, when I think about it, it wasn't unbounded power. It was power within the framework, even as a zookeeper, of those that ultimately owned and defined the parameters of the zoo. I knew something was wrong, like you. I was a hardcore atheist for decades. And I thought if people had any sort of spiritual beliefs, religious or otherwise, they were intellectually down a notch or 2 or 3 or 5 or 15. Until suddenly in 2019, after I actually had left the practice of law behind and moved into a job co-owning a manufacturing company, I began to feel this weird pull in my heart. It was something that I felt was impossible to be experiencing, because I felt this pull was coming from within, but it was being driven by a push from outside of me. And I'd never experienced or even believed that such a thing can exist. Like you, I was a non-believer, but this was the beginning of the path that led to my own awakening, like you said, whether I believed it or not. What would you say to those who say to you, why can't I just be satisfied living in my comforts? You mentioned that movie, The Matrix. There's a character in there that decides to go back into the Matrix after he's free and experience those comforts. What would you say to folks who say, that character, he's the smart one, the rest were morons?
There's so much in what you said, and you've not even completed your story, because the best part comes in how your awakening actually happened. So I'm wondering if maybe you shared that and then we dive into your question.
Yeah, thank you. So after I left the manufacturing company, which is really what that push and pull that I described a few minutes ago was, it was me getting an internal and channeled sense that I needed to shift. I quickly went into the business coaching space and got clients quickly. The pandemic came down very shortly afterwards. In fact, I think that this push coming in 2019 when it did is itself kind of part of a larger plan. I had no idea that a pandemic was coming, but it certainly played into this. And I worked to build a brand, the Myth_Slayer brand, that is rooted in Greek myths, as I was attempting to differentiate myself, as I was attempting to build a following and really move my coaching into a place that would support a solid speaking career and that would interest and intellectually engage me. But all of that thinking about branding, all of that thinking about who I was and how I would serve my clients was still in one way or another rooted in a materialist, rational way of thinking. That being said, very quickly after the pandemic lockdowns began, the truth, the reality outside of the matrix did start peeping and pushing its way through into my worldview, even if I wasn't seeking it or didn't particularly want it. You and I have talked before it, and it may come up during the course of these episodes about how I had experiences with people coming into my life over and over again that claimed to have psychic powers and would share revelations about my life that were uncannily, even frighteningly true. And for people who might be wondering what I'm talking about, like one person in 2020 saying, Scott, your mother's going to die in 2021. You are going to have a sudden need for an eye operation in 2021. And both of those things literally happening. And so this larger field of activity that is related to the spiritual world was going on, but I was ignoring it. I really think that all of these events were cosmic signals saying, Scott, you're still operating within the zoo. Yes, you're a zookeeper. You might even be supervising a bunch of zookeepers. Hey, you might even be in senior management, but you're still in the zoo. And I wasn't ready to let go of that until the divine forced itself upon me. Now, I mentioned earlier weird sort of psychic things happening. And for this series, I'm going to be no holds barred, sharing it all. About 3 months before the incident that you just referenced, Tio, a friend of mine introduced me to a woman who claimed to be a medium. If someone says to me, Scott, I want you to meet a medium, I'm not going to say no. Like, who's going to say no to that? Of course, you're going to be curious. So I met with the woman, and she told me that the next chapter of my life was about to begin. She said that, among other things, that in this next chapter, there was going to be a huge amount of shifting. People were going to leave. New people were going to come in. To get there, I was going to go through a period that required intense courage. I look back on my notes from my time with her, and I wrote in big, bold letters underlined, you're going to have to be brave, she said, braver than you've ever been in your life. And you have to believe in yourself and your business no matter what happens next. Now, I was damn mad. Because the person who introduced me to her, she had said, oh, you're about to hit abundance and wealth and success and prosperity. I was like, how come I didn't hear any of that shit? Come on. Unfair. But you know what? She was just keeping it real. Because within 3 months, I caught a mysterious illness. Those who follow me on this channel, but who follow you, Tio, may not know about this. This was an illness that came out of nowhere. It was predicated by a sudden onset of severe symptoms that left me within days 20 pounds lighter with no body temperature control, the inability to focus, extreme headaches, and the complete inability to walk or even stand, as well as a period where I stopped eating, stopped drinking, my digestive system stopped working. This whole set of things that was scary and was followed by a quote unquote dream I had that was not like any dream I've ever had before, because I remember it as reality. And in that dream, I basically was told that my number was up. And so I was in the hospital during that. There were bizarre things that happened, one of which was a neighbor in the room that I had who was an extremely old Hasidic Jewish man. And younger men would come to his bed every night and surround it. Now, he was probably going to go to the hospice next based on the conversations that I could overhear. And they would sing these songs. And when these songs were sung, they weren't in all human language. I would feel this deep stirring in my soul. I'd start to cry. And the pain would be gone. And I was in a lot of pain. My fear would be gone. My despair would be gone. And it's like I would float outside of my body. It's almost like I could see in my mind some sort of infinite rush coming on that I was part of. I felt peace. I felt love. Some other things happened in the hospital, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those later, not the least of which is there was a complete inability to figure out what was wrong with me, except that I had caught some sort of disease. And then it mysteriously began to get better. But as those events were going on with those men singing, I later found out, by the way, that in the Hasidic community here in New York, if there is news that someone is sick, the men in the community, they're random. They'll just come to the hospital where the person is and they'll sing these songs, and there are no words at all. They believe that they're singing the divine language. And when I spoke to some friends about why this music affected me so much, he said, that's because we believe that's music that's not within the realm of the intellect or of the heart. It's the music of the divine that they're merely channeling. It was touching you. It was changing you. That's why you were feeling it so deeply. And I really think, even as this was happening, I was understanding, Tio, that something was occurring that was beyond the physical, that was in the realm of the metaphysical, but I didn't grasp what. But I did know even then that this thing was happening to someone who had the intellect and the professional background to make something of it, and the voice and the platform to share it. To share it. And so those things, along, again, with other incidents along the way, led to a profound awakening. Like you, afterwards, I went into the world of sacred plants, in my case, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, for healing. I won't get into the details of the journey there. I'm sure that will come up as well. But suffice it to say, symbolically, that journey led me through a myth, showed me mythic avatars, one in particular that has been with me actually my whole life, although I didn't really understand it up until that point, and led me down to a path in which I was ready to, unlike before, truly live and be a myth. It's one thing to tell a client or to say to oneself, these myths are allegories for what we can, could, or should be, like you mentioned, what's right or wrong. It's another thing to make a choice and become it. And to me, becoming it has been my step out of the zoo and into the wild. And as scary as being in the wild can be, Tio, the genius that it activates, and the power that it brings you, is something I will stand behind as indescribable. And I want for everybody.
Yeah, that was great. And I even learned some things which you had not shared with me before about the singing especially, and that was really beautiful and very touching. And so, going to your question about why should someone want this, especially if they've not been forced into it.
Yeah.
We both were you were more forced into it. I was thrown into it with an option. Maybe eventually if I had not taken that option, I would be forced into it, but I was so eager It was so amazing what was happening in my life that I was just like, why would I say no to this? Yours was a much more difficult initiation. My tough challenges came way after I had already committed to it. So I was baited into it in a very sly way, like the universe really baited me by showing me the best of the best of the best. Like it was literally like tasting heaven. And it was like, why would anyone say no to this? I realized the reasons why people say no to it much later. But by that time, I was already too committed. But what I will say is, why should someone follow this, especially if there is no explicit pressure or force or need? Like if you've got a comfortable life, if you've become pretty well established in the zoo, things are going good. I feel like I'm speaking even more so to those people who have it established. Because one of the distinctions that came from me just today morning was that when we are in survival mode, if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when we are establishing our core survival needs, safety is our primary concern. We are looking for safety. But when we go higher into that pyramid and we are going towards self-actualization, it actually flips. We no longer want safety, because to self-actualize, we need risk, we need danger, we need challenge, we need obstacles. We need to actualize our power and our genius. Like that's what self-actualization is. And until we have that, you can't actually enjoy the zoo. For me, I only really started enjoying the zoo when I was living my full life. I had all the comforts before. So, prior to my awakening, I had a pretty good life on the surface. But when I look back and I compare the enjoyment, it's so incomparable, because it was so repetitive and just being distracted all the time, essentially either being a workaholic or engaging in something, but to actually enjoy it deeply, 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 and have that deep fulfillment and satisfaction, not just in work, not just in the substance or the material, the hedonism or whatever it is, but in all of it. Like I even started enjoying hedonism so much more after I felt fulfilled in my spirit and my soul. The most remarkable moment for me was when I got a sandwich grill, like a Foreman grill. I received it, and this was, I think, maybe a year or so into my awakening, and I ordered it and I received it. And I was just so fascinated by it. I was in love with it, and I couldn't understand what was happening. But I suddenly started understanding what actual fulfillment and pleasure feels like when it's complete. Because that grill or substance or whatever was no longer filling a void in me. I was so full, and I could actually enjoy the thing for what it was. Usually what was happening to me before, and what I've seen in so many people, is that the thing is trying to fill something within us. The thing is trying to complete a void, to give us pleasure, but we are not doing it for it. We are doing it to fill something. I actually started understanding what is the pleasure in doing something for it. If I'm playing a video game, or I'm playing a sport, or I'm working, right? If I'm doing it for the pleasure of working, or that sport, or that video game, it's so enriching, it's so fulfilling. But if I'm working because I'm too afraid to stop, I'm working because I will get bored, I will get depressed, I will get anxious, so I have to constantly be busy and distracted. There's no joy in it after some time. It actually kills the joy. Then it just becomes a drug. It just becomes something that's numbing us constantly. And that is the state that I believe the zoo keeps us in. The zoo can never give us real fulfillment. That fulfillment comes in the wild, in the jungle, when we're actually getting to use our genius in our life, to face life, to feel alive. Because in my experience, you can't feel alive after a time in the zoo. Like the lion in the zoo loses its instincts. It doesn't know how to hunt anymore. It's just getting its food delivered to it by Amazon Prime every single day. There is, it's just, there's a death in that. There is a death, a very real death in that. And, I love to enjoy Amazon Prime if I am also still engaging with wildness in some way, if I'm staying alive in some way. If that fire within me is alive, then I can enjoy all the comfort of modern life.
Cute little toy dogs versus wolves. Right. Like, it
Absolutely.
ain't so bad to be a toy poodle and sit in mommy's lap and get fed all the time. But there is something neutered about a cute little poodle. I love dogs, by the way, but still, there's something adorable but sort of sad about the poodle that will never get to be out there at its own most ferocious while it's just eating puppy chow. It's one of those things where embedded in what you're saying is a question that I never asked, and I bet a lot of people never bothered to ask themselves, which is, well, why am I even in this zoo? You just like mindlessly do it. Why am I being a lawyer? Well, because I would never have gotten into medical school because my science scores weren't high enough. And business school, the quantitative parts of it also played to my mathematical weaknesses. So law school looks pretty great. And it does give you a nice cell in the zoo or a nice cage. But
Exactly.
I wasn't thinking about it that way.
As humans, you're given the choice of what zoo animal do you want to be. Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a scientist, a software developer? Like you choose which animal you want to be in the zoo. And that's just what life becomes constantly. It just becomes this, okay, now this is life. I am in the zoo and I'm being kept and I'm protected by the government and by insurance and I'm safe. And as long as I'm safe, I don't need to think too much. I don't need to worry about anything. So I can just keep going. But I feel like that's exactly the point, right? Like there is this realization that happens at some point, is that, is this all there is to it? Of course, during the series, we're going to go much deeper into this, but I talk a lot about feminine and masculine energetics. And I appreciate both and I love both. And I truly believe life cannot be complete without a harmony and integration of both. But what I see a lot in the world is a deep split, and either people lose the feminine or they lose the masculine. It's very difficult to know how to hold both together. And if you truly want to appreciate the beauty of life and enjoy life and experience love and fulfillment and satisfaction, that is the feminine side of life, but it cannot happen without the masculine, fiery beast within us. And overall, I feel like there's a deep feminization in culture in the zoo. And at the same time, there's this toxic macho. So there is this deep split. And the more the toxic macho appears, there's a more feminizing of the culture, which you already can see with the woke movement and all of this political correctness and all of it.
Yeah.
But for me, the real integration is, how do we have the beast and the goddess as one? How does the caveman and the goddess become one within each of us, not as two separate entities, but literally within each of us, that we keep this primal fire alive within us, like the fire of Prometheus that lives within us, and at the same time appreciate the delicate, subtle, the beauty, the nuances of life. And we can actually have both. And the kings and the queens, that's how they lived. Like the king would go out hunting, but would also have this extremely lavish lifestyle and jewels and
Yeah.
comfortable furniture and everything. So they knew how to have everything. And even that's how many gods are depicted, that they have all sides. But there is a New Testament God that is purely all loving, and then there is the Old Testament God that can be fiery and that can be enriched, but is also pretty God everything. Like they are enjoying all sides of life. And in India, especially, their gods are just seen as everything. They have all sides. Like Shiva is, like you said, you have one archetype. The archetype I have always most related to is Shiva, and Shiva is a dancer and is the destroyer of worlds. There is an archetype of Shiva which is half masculine, half feminine. It's literally called Ardhanareshwari, which is, he is literally depicted as half body of a man and half body of a woman. So that for me is the fullness of life. And you cannot find it in the zoo. It is just not available.
It's almost like when Alexander created this zoo, the very first one, and put up those bars or whatever enclosures the animals were in. It was a symbolic cementing of the barrier between the wild and the zoo, but also the masculine and the feminine, because again, we're going to dive into this a lot more later, but the divine masculine historically is associated with order, with putting boundaries around things so that action can be executed, whereas the wild is associated with the divine feminine. I think about the Greek god Dionysus, the god of wine. His followers, his most devoted ones, were women called the Maenads, and they were known to go into these rituals with him, and they would get intoxicated, and they would spin around dervish-like, and they would live out in the deep, dark woods. And heaven forbid you crossed them, or if you got on their bad side, or if in one way or another you did something symbolically that justified their intervention in your life, because they would tear you literally to pieces. And there are all sorts of crazy stories about them doing that to certain male figures in particular. And so I love that we're talking, even if cursorily now, about the divine masculine versus the divine feminine, because this dichotomization that the concept of the zoo or stepping into the matrix represents, that is a really interesting sort of parallel track. I want to step back a little bit for a second, because you also talked about how once you experience life the way it is, as you've stepped into a realm of connection and embodiment of the divine, everything that is in the material world is all the richer. I'm going to keep it real with you. Okay? I think outside of Greek myths, there is one other historically grossly underappreciated font of endless wisdom that the Western world has rejected for decades, and I am determined to shift that font of wisdom and snappy quips and everything. 70s and 80s disco. There was a Donna Summer song about how she was working the midnight shift, right? And it was this character that she goes into work in the office every night, basically. The story is she's in this office, she looks out the window, and while she's working away, everyone else is out having fun. My body still carries on is the couplet, but I'm dying inside. I'm working the midnight shift, right? That is such a perfect capture of the way the entire world seems once you've stepped on the other side. The life that I was living, I'll never forget three times in my career did I have these massive offices. One of them was a corner office with this huge stuffed chair that I could sit in, and all these accoutrements. Another one was a massive office. When I first stepped into it, there was a couch and a coffee table. I had that moved out, so there was a big work table because I wanted people in my office to know they were there to work. Yeah, was I a badass, or was pretty pathetic. But in any event, right, it had a whole closet that I could put my clothes in and everything. And it was as big as my apartment. And I thought it was great, but it wasn't fulfilling anything. It was just all this prestige stuff. And I look back on that era as my life thinking, oh, it was so wonderful. And I went out to nice restaurants all the time and had nice clothes that were suits that were custom made for me, all that sort of stuff. And I still feel like then, without even realizing it, I was that woman. I was Donna Summer, that character, working the midnight shift while other people were outside living their full lives. It's just that I couldn't acknowledge that the window was there. I feel like, as the person that is on this journey and committed to it, I am now finally that person outside of the window enjoying the night, while the other people that don't even realize what the working the midnight shift, even if they're working during the day, is doing to them is all about. And when you're on the other side, it's like you said, you can't look back. It's like I was fighting to be, I don't know, in this dreary, dark office while everyone is out partying. Like, what was I fighting for?
And there's several things, even what you mentioned about the feminine earlier. There's this idea of feminine that it is so soft and it is about beauty and it's about fairness and equality and all of this. And that, like you said, the divine feminine is very wild. And in the cosmic order, like you said, the divine masculine is putting order and the divine feminine represents chaos. And it's this constant duality and war between good and evil and order and chaos. And the line that comes to me is from The Matrix, where in the third movie, I believe it was the architect, when Neo goes to see the architect, which is the representation of the divine masculine. And the architect's role is literally to have this perfect equation where the matrix is in perfect order and everything is going exactly the way it is supposed to be, perfect, pristine, precise. There's nothing that is out of line. That's the architect's job, is to create this equation which is perfect. And then he says, okay, so what about the oracle? And the oracle represents the divine feminine. And he says, so what's the oracle's role? Is to unbalance the equation. It's literally that. It's to create chaos. It's to disrupt. It's to make life wild. And it's never going away. Like, you cannot kill the divine feminine. You cannot kill the divine masculine. That is what makes life eternal, is this constant struggle between order and chaos. We are not meant to create a perfect world. Heaven on earth, for me, is not about peace eternally. What is an actual heavenly feeling is that we constantly get to build something, to create something, to feel purposeful. And that can only happen as long as evil exists, as long as chaos exists, as long as darkness exists. If that ceased to exist, there would be no purpose. Everything has become perfect. And now what? And now what? Now we just live in the Garden of Eden forever and nothing goes wrong. That is death. That is the zoo. That is literal zoo. Nothing ever goes wrong. Right? And the way I see the world today, it can be seen from completely two different lenses. We can see the world as a zoo and we can see the world as a jungle. If you see the world as the zoo, there's this entitlement that life should be fair, that there should be justice, that there should be equality, and nothing should go wrong. There should be no one suffering. Violence should not exist. War should not exist, blah, blah, blah. This is the idea of the perfect zoo. But if you look at life as a jungle, there are beasts who hold power. And there are movements that are happening like DEI where you have to take back power from the beast. But for that, you have to really get into the fight. You cannot be entitled to equality. You have to fight for equality. You have to become that beast. You have to awaken your power and say, no, this is mine. I claim this. But that is a wild nature. That is a beast. It's like, I claim this. This is mine. You have stolen it from me. I want to take it back. You have taken this power. I'm going to claim power too. But on the zoo side of looking at it is like, you stole my power, you should give it back to me because I'm entitled to it. No, you're not entitled to it. This is a zoo. This is either a zoo or it's a jungle. If you treat it like a zoo, you will always be disempowered, disenfranchised, and be the victim. But if you're in the jungle, you have to claim power, you have to grow your power, and you have to take power from the people who have historically held it. So for me, it's like, yeah, it's great that the world is the way it is, because again, if there is inequality, don't be entitled to equality, fight for it, awaken that beast within you and claim your place. The thing that most people don't see is that when that happens, the victims remain victims. Those who have claimed power then realize why the victims cannot just be given power. Those who fight for equality, they don't get equality, they just get power for themselves. That's what happened to politicians. They all go in with these claims that we will make the world a great place, but they become powerful. They get all the power for themselves. They have a great life. They may have come from nowhere, but they get power. They get a great life. And the masses just remain the masses. So if anyone wants power, they have to go claim it individually. Can happen collectively, but in that collective, there are individuals who have to, each of them has to be powerful.
It's interesting talking about power dynamics between identity groups in the world and the zoo versus the jungle. I can't help but think about one of the most destructive tendencies that I have seen in depending on how you frame it, the movement for increasing equality in the world, or the woke movement, or how DEI, however you want to frame these sorts of discussions, which is the insistence of the ultimate conversation stopper, and the expectation that in response to these words, people all but bow down on the ground and grovel and cover themselves in ash for forgiveness. That is when the words "I'm offended" are uttered, right? To me, that's the ultimate. To me, that's a sign that you're living in the total zoo mentality. You're offended. Tough.
Yeah.
Right. Honestly, someone like me, when I hear "I'm offended," maybe it is because I'm in the jungle mentality, and maybe there was a part of me that was in the jungle mentality even before I was aware that a jungle existed. But it's sort of like, okay, I offended you. Let me say it again. And I'll say it again, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again. And then you just clutch your pearls until you choke on. Ridiculous. How is anyone supposed to respect your claim to power or equality if the best you can do is say, "I'm offended"? But you can't fight. There is almost this expectation, well, if you're offended, then I'm supposed to just give you whatever you want. Too bad. The way of the jungle is, do you think a goat or an antelope will look at a leopard or a lion and say, "Stop chasing me, I'm offended"? Right? Or will that antelope and his friends use their horns and their hooves and everything else, their speed, to fight?
And be a collective. They will be a herd. They will be a herd to protect themselves.
Yeah.
That's literally how it works. This is going into a pretty sensitive topic, but the traditional stereotype view of gays has been, that they are weak, that they are dandies or whatever. They are not usually associated with power. But if you see the whole movement, they had to have a lot of power to claim their status. They had to fight for it. And there were a lot of strong people who did it. There were a lot of people who awakened power and said, "I'm not going to take this shit anymore. I want to stand for my rights. I want to stand for my power." And that was very masculine. It was not dandy or weak or anything in any way. Like, there are some very strong, fierce gay men also. So yeah, like, the deer can be offended, or they can get into a collective and they can fight.
Yeah.
Elephants also do that, like they stay in herds. They may be peaceful animals, but you don't mess with them because you can get trampled.
Right. Predators are very careful about who they attack. They weigh the risk and they attempt to separate and divide. But they certainly don't sit around and ask, "May I eat you, please?" Right, it's just, to me, that's total bullshit. And then it sort of ties into this example of the LGBTQ community, right? I mean, you hear stories about how in some of these early police riots in the 70s, there were these drag queens who would whip out these high heels and like beat the shit out of people. Right. So yeah, that is very masculine. But going to what you mentioned earlier on the subject of heels and effeminacy and all that, this stereotype of the feminine as being associated with, pretty hair and jewels and scents and beauty and all of that, to me, that represents literally, again, what happens when people that are capable of living in the zoo and in the wild are stuck in the zoo. Because in many myths, the Vikings, it's most obviously out there, their goddess of love, Freya. The goddess of love was also the goddess of war. In the Iliad, Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, goes and at least attempts to fight in the battlefield. Now, eventually Zeus pulls her back and is like, "Leave that to Athena. You don't need to be doing that." But even with the figure of Athena, a goddess of war, she was seen as the feminine brought into a warrior realm. The goddess of love, Aphrodite, also was notorious for coupling with Ares, the god of war. Again, symbolizing the fierce, wild, dangerous side of the feminine, not just some little delicate mannequin can barely cross the street by herself.
Yeah, in my eyes, the divine feminine doesn't exist without the divine masculine, and the other way around too. Like, it's not divine if it is just one of them. It only exists as a union, and apart from that, they become disintegrated, they lose their power, they lose their beauty, they lose their love, they lose their joy, they lose their genius. It's like, it's only when they're truly whole that both exist in their fullness. The moment one aspect reduces, the other automatically reduces. So I wanted to go into this perhaps in the next episode. And I think what we can do is like give a small glimpse into what that will be. One of the big fears I see when I work with people, the biggest fear, in my opinion, is the unknown. And that's the nature of the jungle, is the nature of the wild, is the nature of the cosmos, of everything that's outside of our control is the unknown. Everything that our minds cannot put into a box and control is the unknown. And I think that's one of the big fears. And in my eyes, the unknown is pretty feminine. It's got this nature of we cannot control it. That's the divine feminine. It cannot be controlled. And it's not meant to be controlled. The archetype of the feminine that we've been talking about, that is very soft and delicate and gentle and submissive, is it's the patriarchal feminine. It's not the divine feminine. The divine feminine cannot be controlled. It's not meant to be controlled, but it works in a beautiful union and harmony when it is with the masculine, when there is respect, when both are equal in power. But the moment there is this attempt to dominate and control, that's when the feminine can unleash hell. And that is what I have seen as the real fear of the unknown, is to be devoured by the mother, by the feminine, by the unknown. And the topic that I want to go into, perhaps in the next episode, we'll see, but is the three great fears. And the first one is death. But it's, while we believe that we have a fear of death, I believe that the real fear that we have is being eternal. The second fear, in my opinion, is power, or being dominated, being controlled, or in a sense, someone having power over us. But again, I believe that the real fear is that we are God and that we have godlike power. And I think that the third fear is losing our sanity. And I think, again, the real fear is that we will finally understand life. And what we actually experience as sanity is complete insanity. Like, the zoo is completely insane. Nothing makes sense in the zoo. If you really look at it from the outside, it's like, that is a crazy zoo. That's a circus.
Yeah.
Nothing makes sense in the zoo. Everything is upside down. Nothing really makes sense. So the fear that people have of losing their sanity is that they lose the construct of the zoo. They stop fitting into the zoo. And that's what happened to me. That's what happened to you. A lot of the people who are very committed to the zoo, they do not like me. They do not understand me. They do not get me or my way of life. I have no judgment towards them. I have no animosity towards them. And I get them. Like, I get why the zoo is what it is and why they want to be in it and why they're so attached to it. But that is the big fear, is that I will no longer fit into the zoo. And I will be forced into the wild. And I've seen this is really one of the big fears. I will lose my sanity. For some people, it's much bigger than the fear of death. Is that at least if I die, it's all over and I can move on. But if I lose my sanity, I'm still alive. What do I do then? So, yeah, I believe that, having gone through my whole journey and having been on both sides and having been in between, I believe that the real fears that we have are eternity, because that means that the game doesn't end ever. Death is a pretty good escape. You can be afraid of death, but if you believe that death is where it all ends, it's very convenient. I can do whatever I want. I can be whoever I want, and then I just die or I kill myself. It's the end of the game. But what if the game never ends? Never. Like, never. You have to really understand, never. It just doesn't end. It just keeps going. So if you have a fear, it haunts you for eternity. If you are ashamed of something, it haunts you for it. That is real fear. Is that you will never be free of it. The second is that, what if I am powerful and I am responsible and I have to fix my life, and no one is coming to save me, and God doesn't save me, and Jesus doesn't save me, and the government doesn't save me, and blah, blah, blah. What if I have to have God-like power and create my own life and shape my own life? That is scary because I cannot blame anyone anymore. I cannot feel like a victim anymore. I have to do it all by myself, and I have to face the consequences, and I have to deal with all the shit that comes when you have power. People will hate me, people will attack me, snakes may come up from the side, scorpions may come up from the side, and yeah, that is life. And God is constantly, like, heaven is always under attack from demons. Like, at least in India, that's in Indian mythology, like, there's a constant war between good and evil. And if you're being a god, yeah, you have to fight that war. And then, yeah, the third fear is sanity. When you really start understanding life, you start understanding that life is what it is. There is chaos, there is darkness, there is evil, there is suffering. That is the real sanity, is understanding that, being able to see that, and not being in this cocoon of life should not be this way. Life should be perfect.
These conversations are going to be rich, going to be intense, going to be powerful. They have mind, zoo cage, even universe-busting possibilities within them. I think that we know exactly what next time's topic is going to be about. And one of the things that I love about this series is that, as is the case in the jungle, there's going to be unpredictability. There's going to be wildness. We're not putting out any iron bars around what the times are that we're talking, what the topics are that we're talking about, who does what or who says what. I've already shared things on this episode that I normally wouldn't share because this episode exists in the realm of the wild. But for me, also communicating to those who might be peeking between the bars of the zoo and thinking about what's on the other side. 𝗙, is there anything that you want to say as we wrap into the final moments of today's episode?
The fourth Matrix movie was very underappreciated, in my opinion. I think it's an absolute classic, but it got terrible ratings mainly because it was actually very confrontational and attacking the audience. Like, the first three Matrix movies were kind of this whole liberation, but then the fourth movie is kind of putting a mirror to the audience. The most fundamental idea of the fourth Matrix is that the cage has been opened, but no one wants to leave anymore. The first three Matrix movies was all about you're trapped. The system has you. You cannot break out of the Matrix. It's this whole conspiracy to keep you trapped. And you have to fight, and you have to do this, and you have to escape the Matrix. That was the whole idea of the first three movies. But the fourth movie literally says, do you know what? The cage has been opened, but no one wants to leave anymore because the cage has become so comfortable. It's become so comfortable. With all that we have in the world today, why would you want to leave the cage? That is the reality, is that the Matrix has been opened up. You can leave the Matrix at any time. And the sad reality is that most people have just lost the will to leave the Matrix. That fire has actually died. And in many cases, the fire actually needs to be reinvigorated from scratch. We need to create fire. And that was my case. So I won't go into the story today, but I had completely lost my fire. There was a period where I had zero fire. And so I have literally had to create fire from nothing. And that is really, one of the fundamental things about my work is it's called the infinite zero, is how to create the infinite from the zero, how to create fire from nothing, how to create life from nothing. And that is real power in my experience. It requires power, it requires genius to create nothing, to create something from nothing, to create the infinite from nothing. And that's where this journey is headed. So those are my closing thoughts, and I'm very excited.
To step out of the zoo, to create yourself as a creature in the wild, that is genius. That is power. That is being a myth. Here's to next time to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Super excited.
I want your future to be epic.